So, good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Skinner, founder of MarketingKind, and welcome to this MarketingKind exchange, in which we'll explore how we can protect ourselves from the rising threat of online manipulation, as well as better harnessing the power of ethical influence, with someone who has influenced all of our lives and work, Professor Cass Sunstein. Cass has written 50 books, you heard that right. Some of my favorites of which include the final edition of Nudge with Richard Thaler, How Change Happens, which has some really electrifying content, Noise with Daniel Kahneman and Olivier Siboni that I have seen on many members' bookshelves, Look Again with Tali Sharot, and Liberalism in Defense of Freedom that I can't show the camera because I happen to have enjoyed the audiobook version, but which was a fascinating account from someone who has worked with three very different US presidents. Cass is one of the most cited legal scholars in the world. He's the Robert Walmsley Professor at Harvard University. He was formerly the administrator of the White House Office for Information and Regulatory Affairs in the Obama administration, has held senior roles at the World Health Organization, the Pentagon, and the Department for Homeland Security, where he received the Distinguished Public Service Medal, which I understand is the highest honor bestowed by the department on a civilian. He's also advised the United Nations, the European Commission, the World Bank, and businesses and governments in nations all around the world, including our own, where under Prime Minister David Cameron, as it happens, we created the first so-called nudge unit, the Behavioural Insights Team, following which Barack Obama created a similar unit in the US, as well as encouraging the adoption of nudge practices across all agencies, and following which governments, businesses, and institutions all around the world have followed suit. The impact of nudge theory on marketing and advertising has been especially profound. And my most recent read from Cass is, of course, one of his latest books, Manipulation, which currently takes up entire wall space in Waterstones, and which may be a particularly timely read, coming at a moment when many people fear that a tech-enabled manipulation may be undermining our capacity to solve our most important problems, holding back our health, our prosperity, and even harming the fabric of democracy. So welcome to MarketingKind, Cass. How are you feeling today?
I'm great. I'm very grateful to be here.
Wonderful. Following that introduction, actually, I can't resist starting with something that I've never actually heard you express any expertise in, but which clearly is a subject that you master, time management. I mean, are there any particular heuristics or routines that you use that in some way contribute to that extraordinary level of productivity?
Part of it's enjoyment of writing and work. So if I get up in the morning, courtesy of my dogs at 7 in the morning or 7:30, and I'm awake enough to do some work, I will do some work. And if I have an idea, I'll start sketching it. If I have a book manuscript, as I do right now, that's not adequate, if I have half an hour, let's say between 10 in the morning and 10:30 in the morning, I might spend that on that project. And if there are things like meetings, academic meetings, if they are half-hour meetings, I'll suggest, can we possibly do it in 15 minutes? Or if it's something where I know I can be more useful, maybe by email than by trudging to some place, I'll say, can we try email? And that's not always the warmest way to react, but it's sometimes more helpful to someone who's just trying to find a reference or get a quick reaction to a paragraph.
Yeah, it does feel like when we work with the grain of where instinctively we're moving at any point in time, that's helpful. So I hope that, among other things, the future of the workplace is more flexible around people's self-determined energy and where we want to go. Now, we don't see the world as it is. We see the world largely through the lens of the action that we perceive we can undertake in it, whereas somebody else might just see a floor as something you walk across. A dancer might see it as a space that you can bring to life in performance. And I wonder if you could bring to life a glimpse of what it's like to see the world through the lens of your expertise in nudge theory.
Sometimes I can see an architecture in an environment. So it might be that there's an airport that will have an architecture that's trying to steer people to buy things. So in some airports, you can't really get to the gate without going through stores, and the stores are arranged so the things that are really tempting and that will lead to impulse purchases are so visible you can't avoid them. Sometimes there'll be an online site which is attracting your eye to something that the site generator wants you to purchase. It might be something that's completely useless or something that might make you happy for a day, but after 3 days, you think, why did I buy that? And so the use of architecture to influence or manipulate choice, I'm probably particularly alert to, though I can't say I'm not vulnerable to. If there's something that has, I really like chocolate things. So if there are Cadbury bars at my local store in a visible place, the likelihood that I will get at least one is close to 100%.
Remarkably, as a coincidence, um, you're the second Harvard professor to have told us about their love of Cadbury's chocolate, because we did an exchange on the future of capitalism with Rebecca Henderson, and she particularly loves fruit and nut bars that were only available in the UK. And so we were hoping to sort of tempt her across the ocean with fruit and nut, but I sense that maybe tougher with your broader predilection for chocolate.
Well, it may be that the percentage of people who like Cadbury bars is 100%. So if you have two people who work on academic stuff who like Cadbury bars, that might be less remarkable than one would think.
But the fact that they liked it enough to raise it in conversation was
Yeah.
still memorable. Um, just a moment more on nudge. Um, the book was a global phenomenon that influenced everything from heads of state to being a global bestseller that really captured the public imagination. Now, of course, that is massively because it's an extremely well-written book with a very important idea at its heart. But history has other examples of well-written books with important ideas that didn't become a global phenomenon, influencing everything from heads of state to popular culture. Is there anything in nudge theory itself, or in your work on how change happens, perhaps, that might explain why that book took off in that way at that time? That must have, among other things, been life-changing even for you.
Thank you for that. There's a book I did pretty recently called How to Become Famous, which is actually not about a how-to manual, but instead the vicissitudes and serendipities that make prominence, fame, success possible. So the thesis of the book is that whether we're speaking of the Beatles or of Muhammad Ali, the great boxer, or of Taylor Swift, or of Olivia Rodrigo, and I hope you know her name, or of the actor Claire Danes, or of Shakespeare, or of um, Connie Converse, one you probably haven't heard of. A lot of things had to happen externally to those people to get them to be famous. So the Mona Lisa wasn't a famous painting, at least not of the level it has now, until relatively recently after it got stolen from the Louvre. John Keats was not in his lifetime super famous. He thought he was a failure. William Blake was kind of lost. And there are things that happen either in the course of a lifetime or posthumously that lead to spectacular success. And those things may require a certain level of proficiency or more on the part of, let's say, the Beatles, who were fantastic, but that's not a sufficient thing. And so I haven't kind of tracked the arc of the book Nudge, but Thaler and I are uh, not displeased with our book. We worked really hard on it, a couple of rounds, but we'd agree that the fact that it did as well as it did was a product of things that were external to the book's quality. So we got lucky in various ways that certain political leaders liked it early on, that it got some very happened to get some very favorable assessments early on. It could have been that those would have been bumped from the relevant places. So it was a little like a snowball that got bigger and bigger and bigger. I saw kind of contemporaneously to our books doing well, my friend Barack Obama became president. And that was on a much larger level, really similar, where he's great. I'm a huge fan of Obama in every way. But was it inevitable that he become president? By no means. Various things had to happen external to him that led him to the White House. And I think this is true for all of us. If we think of our lives, something that went well in it, it might be that we get to have a job. It might be that we have someone who appears to like us and we like them back. That has a lot to do with things that could easily have gone the other way. And that's kind of how life is. And it's a little like an illusion in the mind where if something works out, we tend to think it's intrinsic properties of, let's say, us or what we did that made the thing work out. But that's not sufficient. It's other stuff. And Nudge was the beneficiary and continues to be of a lot of other stuff.
Is there an implication, and I promise we'll turn to manipulation in the next question, but your answers are so interesting, I can't resist diving in. But it's interesting that you said that that book is not a how to become famous. And is there something in what you're saying that it would be more valuable to focus not on becoming more famous or more influential, but to create, but on better creating an environment in which the right people and the right ideas can be amplified in the right ways at the right times?
I should say that for anyone who wants to become famous, the book How to Become Famous is a guaranteed guide. So if you want to become famous, read the book, and probably within 10 days, if you don't really follow the lessons well, it might take as much as 2.5 weeks to use the, I'm being ridiculous, of course. The book isn't at all like this. So the book, the title is a joke, and what you say is pretty precise, that if you do something that increases the chances, let's say you make a product that is a really good product, and then you connect with various others who can get people clear on the goodness of the product, then you're going to be okay. My dad, not far from where I am right now, wasn't spectacularly successful, but he did well enough to, feed his kids, and he created a little construction company, just a little construction company where he built houses, and he was pretty adept at letting people know that there were houses being built, and if they wanted to buy them, they could do that. And he created a little network, and his two children got to go to college and have clothes. So thank you, Dad. And he was good at his job, but he was also creating the conditions. If you look at people who are successful, not in the sense that they're in the newspaper, but they're doing something they really enjoy and they're able to put food on the table, it's often something like what you're describing, that they're adept or spectacularly adept at creating circumstances through which their own activity is known by others and others want to benefit from it. If you think of Jane Austen, this is a very dramatic example. She didn't do that great in her life. She did pretty well. But after her life, people who were fans and also family members publicized Jane Austen's work in ways that were marketing isn't a bad word. They were brilliant marketing. And it happened that they had a great product. And this is at a macro scale, Jane Austen's, iconic quality. Was that because she was Jane Austen and really good at writing novels? Kind of, but that's not nearly enough. And her lifetime is testimony to that. And, we all know people who are doing pretty well, maybe improbably, they're doing pretty well at something or other. Um, in some walk of life, and their quality is one thing, but their capacity to create cascades of, let's say, interest on the part of others is essential.
Yeah, yeah. I probably will tend to manipulation now. So manipulation we could think of as a sort of shadow side of influence. And clearly manipulation is something you've been thinking about for quite some time. But why did you choose to publish a book on manipulation and why at this particular point in time?
I think the origin of it came when I gave a talk in Germany at least 10 years ago, probably more, when I'd been thinking about it as an academic topic for probably 4 or 5 years, but not as a book. And I thought when I was speaking to Germany, to public officials there, that it would be not useless to explore a right not to be manipulated. So that was the idea that I spoke about. And I found in Germany and in Europe generally, there was keen interest in a right not to be manipulated. And that seem to fit with the temper of the times in the sense that in the commercial sphere and in the political sphere, manipulation is everywhere, and there's competence at manipulating people that humanity's never had before by virtue of technology as well as just empirical testing of what can trick people to do things. I think another thing, aside from the German talk, was encountering on the part of very smart academics a concern that nudging was manipulative. So I didn't enjoy that very much, but I was struck by it, a little like a slap on the face. I think it was written as a slap on the face, and I felt it. And I thought, if nudging is manipulative, we have a problem because manipulation rightly has a bad odor. And then the question is, what is manipulation? And so much of the discussion in various circles, public circles as well as government circles, throws the word around, but doesn't distinguish between it and influence. And since certain forms of marketing are influence that aren't manipulative, and certain forms of interacting with people one knows are influence, like I'm a lawyer, you can influence a client, and it probably shouldn't be manipulative, but it can make a difference. If you're doing it right, you can encourage people to take this path, and you're not treating them disrespectfully. Or a doctor is engaged in influence, potentially manipulation. Also, it occurred to me, and thanks for indulging me, you're seeing my excitement about the topic, that a world without manipulation would be colorless. So people who are too hard on manipulation probably don't have a sense of humor. Yes, that a little manipulation is kind of cool. Being manipulated and manipulating can be fun, and it has to be in a context where there's trust and a sense of mischief. So that's interesting. If there's a little manipulation on the part of, let's say, a commercial actor or a politician, is that always terrible? Probably not.
Mm.
But again, we have to be clear on what's meant by manipulation. So the policy imperative of getting hold of the what is frequently a problem, as well as the conceptual challenge of it's like swimming in something which is very murky waters. I felt during much of the book. I wanted to go like that, not a very good swimmer. But get rid of the gunk and see something that is H2O,
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah, I'm really pleased you used the word mischievous? Because actually, I was going to ask the question, some people might think that marketing, since you mentioned marketing, is all about manipulation. And people might make that accusation against marketing even more strongly than against nudge theory specifically, maybe. And yet a mischievous person might say a bit of manipulation is at the heart of what can make it fun in the first place. I mean, should marketing be manipulation free? Or is it certain types of manipulation we should avoid? And can we be fully effective in marketing without manipulation?
Let me tell you two things. First, as we've discussed, I've worked on the book for 15 years. And if people don't like it or if they don't get it, I will be so devastated. And that sadness will spill over to my children. I have teenagers, and teenagers already have a hard time. And if their dad is in despair, that's really a tough thing for kids. And for me to be just suffering because that's manipulative. I just engaged in an act of manipulation, which
I'm buying
marketers,
it.
it's not true. I'll be fine. But marketers should still steer clear of that form of emotional blackmail, let's call it. That's not so good. Let's try another, which is that um, my book on how to become famous, I don't know if it makes people famous, but I did hear some people who got it, who said that they just were so joyful the next few weeks. Just the book gave them a kind of boost. Okay, that's between manipulation and deception, so it's kind of not ideal. So I'm trying to give categories of marketing that is beyond mischievous. Now, if there's humor in marketing that's trying to get people, let's say, to purchase a new laptop that shows a skip in their step, and the laptop really is a good laptop, and people, plausibly are dancing a little bit when they see how fast it is and how the colors look. That's, I think that's not manipulative, actually. It has mischief in it. And to use humor and wit, we need to define manipulation. We'll get there. But to use humor and wit to get people to purchase things or to invest in things, nothing should be forbidden about that. That's life. That's fine.
Now, let's say as a marketer, however, that I take your message to heart. I read manipulation, and I do everything to make sure that my marketing activity is ethical. A part of marketing activity is, of course, advertising, and a lot of advertising is online. If I put an ethical ad on an online platform, and that platform we kind of know is probably not aligned with the well-being of its users. Maybe using algorithms that lead to a polarization of society, maybe is harnessing data in a way that many people aren't aware of and that we might think of as manipulative. If my advert is ethical and aligned with your thinking, how much responsibility should I take for what you could say is innocently using the platforms that we need to use in marketing, or you could describe as sponsoring a broader type of manipulation as a sort of second order responsibility that isn't me, but which is being funded by that advertising?
It's a great question. It's kind of a clean hands, dirty hands question. If you have a completely ethical ad on, let's say, a social media platform that is also violating privacy and, let's say, exploiting people's lack of information and behavioral biases, it's not the worst thing in the world because your own conduct is faultless. It might be that you're contributing to a situation which perpetuates something not good. It might be if you went elsewhere, you would at least a little tiny bit increase the likelihood that lots of people would go elsewhere. Of course, there's a collective action problem. If it's a horrific wrongdoer, then probably shouldn't advertise there. And then people would make different judgments about what those are. I would not put at top of the list of behavior that needs to be changed, an ethically faultless advertisement on a platform that is not ethically faultless.
Oh. Now, I've heard you say that, advances in behavioral science constitute some of the most exciting advances in knowledge of the past decades. And I very much agree with that. Nevertheless, one sort of concern that's arisen in previous conversations with guests, we've had guests, for example, where we've talked specifically about well-being and human flourishing. And from a distance, it doesn't necessarily, behavioral science has focused so powerfully on better influencing choices. But if that isn't rooted in a deeper contemplation of what constitutes human flourishing in the first place and how to create better options that are more in the interests of the people that we're serving, could it be like we were just talking about cars before we went live. If you imagine a car and you powerfully increase the performance of the acceleration, but don't increase the performance of the brakes, you've improved the car in some way, but actually made it more dangerous. If we get much better at influencing choices, but are not more profoundly rooting the options we create in a better alignment with human flourishing, is that a danger? Is that something you recognize, or is there a way to think through that?
Okay, it's a great question. So let's talk about two streams of behavioral research. This isn't going to be exhaustive, but two streams that are relevant to what you're describing. One is the heuristics and biases stream that asks, when do human beings make mistakes and why? And it might be that people make mistakes because they show present bias, they're focused on today and not the long term. It might be that people make mistakes because they show unrealistic optimism. They think things are going to work out, even though statistically they aren't. It might be that people's risk perceptions go awry because, for example, they show availability bias, where they think that a risk is more likely to come to fruition if it is readily called to mind. So there's present bias, optimistic bias, and availability bias, all three of which can lead to incorrect judgments, either judgments that make for false judgments of fact, as in the case of optimistic bias and availability bias, or judgments that palpably lead to a mistake in terms of, let's say, someone's year, because they are ignoring the last 6 months and attending a ton to the first 2 days. Now these are empirical findings. They don't say anything about flourishing. They're just empirical findings. And that's a stream of research which has produced a bunch of Nobel Prizes and which is ongoing and which I regard as, an off the charts achievement of the human mind. Then there's work on well-being itself. And Daniel Kahneman, a pioneer on heuristics and biases, spent a lot of time on well-being itself. And what he and many others, Richard Lehrer in the UK is a pioneer, Paul Dolan, the UK is also a pioneer, try to measure subjective experience, meaning how good is a day for people? Are they depressed? Are they afraid? Are they stressed? Are they relaxed? Are they calm? Are they pleased by how things are going? We have a lot of data on that. We also have data on something different from subjective experience, so measured, which is overall life satisfaction, which might pick up meaning. And there's specific work, Dolan's done it, a lot of it on meaning. So you might think this is a terrible month in terms of I'm not smiling a whole lot, but it's really meaningful because, let's say, I'm learning how to play the piano, or I'm getting really good at something, or I'm spending a lot of time with my children, which for some isn't producing a ton of smiles or constant smiles, but is super meaningful. Or maybe I'm taking care of an elderly relative and it's meaningful but not pleasing. So we have a lot of research on meaning as well as on pleasure, or day-to-day happiness, experience, well-being. There's more recent work, which is very incipient, about richness of experience. So people might think my life is super meaningful and I'm smiling a lot. That's a lucky combination, but it's kind of the same.
Mm.
And I'm kind of getting a little habituated to it, and maybe I'm not feeling alive. I'm feeling a little dead with all that meaning and all that happiness. So I want something else. And people do want diversity of experience. And
Mm.
this is the most recent bit of research on well-being. And all this is empirical research, which is not saying anything deep about flourishing, just as people care about meaning and what gives them a sense of meaning. People care about subjective experience and what makes that good. Or people care about diversity of experience and what will they sacrifice for that. So these are empirical lines of research which aren't about heuristics and biases, but very flourishing lines of research. And they're, I think, off the charts, also phenomenal. They don't have the maturity yet,
Mm.
the empirical work, as the heuristics and biases stuff, but we know a lot more. We know that people really don't like commuting. We know that people really like, this is not so surprising, but since only adults are listening, people like intimate relations. Human beings tend to like those. Commuting goes to the bottom, the other goes toward the top. And this is data. Okay, fine. Then the concern about there's not enough about flourishing, there's a ton about flourishing. The heuristics and biases stuff just isn't about flourishing. The
Mm.
stuff about flourishing is what's about flourishing. Now, what we do with nudging is built on the empirical work in part on heuristics and biases. But whether we should nudge people to smoke more and eat more really fattening food and to crash into the next car or nudge them to eat healthier, et cetera, is independent of the nudging instruments. So we have tools, automatic enrollment, educative nudges, as through warnings and reminders. Warning, you haven't crashed your car today.
Mm.
Maybe you'd like to. That's a nudge to try to get people to crash. I don't think anyone's doing it. I hope not. And we would need a normative judgment about how to nudge. Now, Thaler and I try to be, in our joint work, certainly philosophically humble. And we say that the criterion is whether the nudge makes people better off as judged by themselves, the as judged by themselves criterion, which we're not dogmatic about. We think it's a pretty good rule of thumb, and you can think of it as a form of non-sectarian utilitarianism. So if people are, let's say, nudged to eat healthier or nudged not to get sick, are they judging themselves better off? If they are, we declare presumptive success. Now, we could be fussy and think that people's judging themselves better off isn't actually right. And that's always a discussable thing. But as good liberals, not left of center types, but part of the liberal tradition, we're very enthusiastic, as you say, about freedom. And if people think, you nudged me to have double-sided printing rather than single-sided, and I'm really glad because the printing's faster and I waste less. I don't have to carry as much. Then that's probably a pretty good nudge.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I particularly appreciated in reading Manipulation. I know you spent a lot of time in Chicago. I happen to be a Chicago Bears fan. And I've had a number of frustrations with a particular streaming service and reading about what you describe as dark patterns, making it easy to subscribe, hard to cancel, easy to pay for a service, hard to get a refund if it goes wrong. I recognized, and I also appreciated your writing on the risks of deep fakes and algorithmic harm as well. One thing you've written about somewhat positively is what you've described as AI choice engines. Now, I just want to put the notion. So Yuval Noah Harari, the historian, has I think put it sort of described as persuasively as anyone that humans are essentially guided by stories. And he's raised the concern that if AI becomes a better storyteller than we are, we could lose our sense of free will. And that could be very dangerous. In manipulation, you write quite positively about the role that AI-powered choice engines might play in helping us make better decisions. Do you recognize Yuval's concern? Do you share them? And what would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, that's great. And I'll tell you in a moment when I'm smiling. We'll start mundane. So let's say, suppose someone's going to buy a motor vehicle and they don't know what motor vehicle to buy. They might think this one sounds good, but there are features of it that they don't know a whole lot about. And also because they're human, the full set of motor vehicle options is not present to them. So what I'm thinking with the choice engine is you go in and you say, I'd like a car. It has the following 5 features. Can you list 5 candidates in preferred order for me, given my tastes? And this is a great boon to people who might otherwise find themselves buying cars that don't suit their situations as well because they hadn't heard of the other. And what's true for motor vehicles can be true of any number of things. It could be true for appliances. My coffee maker, I don't want your pity, but my coffee maker just broke, so I deserve your pity. And I'm going to get a new one. And a choice engine could help me identify what would be best given everything my family cares about. So that's what I'm bullish on choice engines as a way of overcoming 2 things. Our lack of information that unless you're really obsessed with coffee makers, you probably don't know everything there is to know about coffee makers, and also behavioral biases, where we might be unrealistically optimistic. We might use the availability heuristic and get really scared about some risk that actually is trivial. We might be uh, uh, inattentive. So there are certain features of products that we don't attend to that really might end up mattering. Choice engines can help with behavioral biases. So there's all that. With respect to the idea of narratives overpowering us, I'll tell you why I'm smiling. That grand stories about history's arc or about where we're headed, increasingly, what's the right word? Cautious about. I think that's the gentlest word I can use. And the reason is there are any number of grand stories out there, and which one is true, it's extremely hard to know at the moment you're in them. And I'm going to draw a connection with the book Noise, where we are in the book Noise, very focused on the unpredictability of narrative arcs over time, that there's noise in how things work out. And for large things, we don't see them because history is only run once. So you don't see a history in which there wasn't apple, but there was instead orange, or you don't see a history in which the Beatles never really made it and the Dave Clark Five were the biggest, or you don't see a history in which Donald Trump crashed and burned and Hillary Clinton became the most successful president of the last 100 years. You don't see any of those. And the idea, and that's kind of a testimony to the power of narratives. The narratives organize the mind, but they can also um, uh, steer us wrong. The idea that AI is going to generate narratives that will distort our judgments and manipulate us in various ways, it's very unclear to know how to think about that. It's an imaginable future. Is it our future? we could describe 17 other futures. Maybe 12 of them would be extremely upbeat and 5 of them would be extremely alarming. And which one is ours? I think we don't know. So there's a scenario being depicted here of narrative control by AI. I don't believe it. Now, why do I not believe it? It's probably a matter of congenital optimism that makes me a skeptic. So we should take that with many grains of salt. It's also, I'd like to say, but of course I would, that it's an evidence-free speculation, though it might turn out to be true. Who knows?
Yeah, the guiding narratives are much more discernible with hindsight, and Yuval is, of course,
Yes.
professionally a historian. So that's a very interesting take on it. The other one I'm going to throw at you on manipulation. I read actually, I recently read your article from July on manipulation in The Guardian. And I received a more recent article in The Guardian from their US correspondent, Robert Reich. And I'm just going to read a couple of lines to you. The richest man on earth owns X. The family of the second richest man owns Paramount, which owns US TV networks CBS and could soon own Warner Brothers, which owns CNN. The third richest man owns Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. The fourth richest man owns the Washington Post and Amazon MGM Studios. If you're a multi-billionaire, you might view democracy as a potential threat to your net worth. Control over a significant share of the dwindling number of media outlets would enable you to effectively hedge against democracy by suppressing criticism of you and other plutocrats and discouraging any attempt to, for example, tax away your wealth. Now, I know you have a solid background at the University of Chicago, but what's your take on the question of how fully can we really adequately address manipulation without addressing the extreme inequalities that open the door to such widespread manipulation in the first place?
Okay, so it's a great question. So let's suppose we had a world, a parallel world, just like ours, but without a lot of income inequality. But there are some people selling things, a lot of them are, and some of those people sell things by failing to engage people's capacity for reflective and deliberative choice. So they employ a form of trickery to get people to spend their time and money on products and activities that don't do them much good. Or let's suppose that people use strategies that compromise consent and that impose harm, as by automatically enrolling people in payment plans, which they didn't get clear access to when they were making the deal. And as a result, they're paying a certain amount of money every month. Or let's suppose companies are using sludge, understood as administrative burdens, to make it really hard to extricate oneself from a commercial relationship. In that world of relative equality, there would be a lot of manipulation. And if you did something about it, you would make people's lives a lot better. You might even, in some respect, save people's lives, especially with respect to risk running. Now, in a world of massive income inequality of the sort the author rightly describes, there's a ton you can do to help people to reduce manipulative practices. If there's a right not to be manipulated and it's cashed out, so to speak, in the relevant ways, then the world would be significantly better for those people. Now, if there's massive income inequality, there are practices, I'm not even sure how to describe them, that a self-interested zillionaire would engage in to insulate self from risk. Now, what do you do about those? Those probably wouldn't be limited to manipulation. if they were, then the person wouldn't be being very creative. There's there's a lot that you would do, like own and employ. So I'm thinking that what that author is concerned about is a universe of problems. I'm concerned about them too. It's doesn't not overlap with the concern about manipulation, but there's an assortment of initiatives, which are manipulation specific initiatives, which could be undertaken in a world without massive income inequality, and which should and can be undertaken in a world with massive income inequality. The fact that if you do those good things, you're not going to solve an assortment of other problems, some of which overlap, is fair, but the floor is open. So what are you going to do about those other things?
Yeah, yeah.
We should be all ears.
Speaking of being all ears, I remind people that we'll also weave in some questions from the group shortly. But to dive in a little further on that topic, so we typically think of nudges, I guess, as intentional efforts to explicitly or to influence a particular set of choices. But you've written, of course, that there are many unintentional nudges, that we're surrounded by nudges all the time. Even the weather is a nudge. Is there a way to audit the nudges that people are, or a given population or set of people are exposed to measure how manipulative they are, to identify any costs with that? Is there anything in today's environment that particularly concerns you? I mean, you've written in one of your books about the devastatingly incremental nature of the descent into fascism. You know, we may not be descending into fascism, but a lot of people are worried about the states of democracies around the world. Is there a way to assess the nudges that are bearing down on particular people, and how would we get a purchase on that?
Okay, so some nudges are educative. So if you go to the store and it says this has peanuts in it, because some people are allergic to peanuts, that's an educative nudge. If you go to a store and it says this has this amount of salt and sugar in it, or if there's a traffic light system, those are educative nudges. If you get a reminder on your cell phone, here's mine, set my phone, I don't think I have any reminders, saying that you have a bill due, and if you don't pay next week, you're going to have a late fee. That is a nudge. If you get a note saying that you have a court appointment or a doctor's appointment, that is an educative nudge. If you get a warning of some kind about health risks associated or safety risks associated with something, that is a nudge. Now, I'm trying to be brisk here. The universe of educative nudges is really big. It could be easily a TV show, educative nudges, and a very long TV show, and such a fun TV show. And that TV show would have no manipulation in it, because all you're doing is increasing people's capacity for agency by informing them of things. Then there are architectural nudges. An architectural nudge might be you go to the store and the healthy foods are at the checkout counter and the less healthy ones are a little further away, or vice versa. Or it may be that you're automatically enrolled in a pension plan, as I am at my university, and the UK is keen on that. Or that if you are poor and you go to school, you're a little kid, you automatically get free school meals, as some countries do exactly that. Or it might be that when you're getting your driver's license, you're asked a series of questions about things that are car related. That's an architectural nudge. You're not being educated. You're just being asked to indicate what you want so as to overcome inertia, which is a very powerful force. Now, architectural nudges typically aren't manipulative either. Architectural nudges are efforts to create a social environment which is fully transparent to choosers, which they can avoid those efforts if they want. and there's no problem of manipulation there.
Mm.
So kind of my first submission is that there's a universe of nudging, educative and architectural, which is either not close to or doesn't cross the boundary into manipulation because it doesn't compromise people's ability to exercise reflective and deliberative choice. On the contrary, the educative ones increase people's capacity to make reflective and deliberative choice, and the architectural ones make life simpler and mean so you don't have to devote a lot of effort to things like what are all my settings going to be on my cell phone? Who has time to figure that out? Thank you, company, for having automatic settings, most of which I tend to like. So an audit of educative nudges seems not like the first priority for governments. I mean, transparency about them would be a good idea, but that would not be my first choice for what you're going to audit. Maybe audit corruption or fraud or something. An audit of architectural nudges also wouldn't be priority number one if a political candidate in Italy said, let's say, my program is to audit architectural nudges so everyone knows what they are. It's not the worst thing in the world, but uh, that candidate maybe isn't going to be unbelievably popular. There are other things to focus on. Now, if we're dealing with manipulative practices and
Mm.
uses of choice architecture to manipulate people, an audit of that would be a good idea. And I'm actually working right now with others on an app that can help do that, that can detect dark patterns and consider dark patterns things as not clearly consented to engagements that people have with a seller,
Yeah.
and people don't have clear clarity about that, or easy engagement and very difficult extrication.
Mm.
That to audit that kind of thing, that's a very good idea.
Yeah. Do you have a name for the app? We'll want to be looking out for that.
It's en route. It's under discussion. The paper is under submission, and it probably will be published in the next months.
Yeah.
It might have manipulation in it.
Well, we'll definitely look out for that and keep checking on manipulation with your name to keep up to it. I invite anyone to start raising your digital hands as you have questions. You've teased the notion a few times of a right not to be manipulated. Uh, how would that work, and how would we see life changing if that concept were adopted?
Okay, so of course, what I'd be familiar with is the practices in the nation where everyone speaks with my barbaric accent and the American accent, that is. And the right not to be manipulated was actually announced by our government a little over a year ago, I think, not as a formal legal thing, but as an aspiration. People should have a right not to be manipulated, so said our government. And then that has been cashed out through a bunch of regulatory initiatives, including click to cancel, where it's really easy to cancel something, including uh, transparency requirements for, let's say, add-on fees of various kinds, through ensuring that people can't be tricked through lack of disclosure into parting with money, and in a tax on time taxes,
Mm.
also known as sludge. So the US government has had a bunch of initiatives in this vein. I'm sure Europe has also. In the United States, the notion of people have the right not to be manipulated has been explicitly endorsed. So what I'd like to think is we'll see a thousand flowers bloom where various countries, in the UK, I've worked a little bit with the Competition and Markets Authority, which is a fantastic document on online choice architecture. And the UK has been on top of the problem of manipulation through the, let's say, uh, self-interested use of choice architecture to take people's money.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to ask, you touched upon policy changes in the US and the UK. I wanted to ask, what did you see or what have you seen as some of the most promising reforms being done to protect citizens from corrosive or immoral manipulation while still preserving a free and competitive market?
Yeah, thanks for that. There was an initiative a couple of years ago that started with junk fees. So that was the term. It's not a perfect term, but the word junk means is add-on fees that often hurt people at the bottom of the economic ladder, particularly by saying, you can buy this for X amount of money, and then there are add-on fees that are significant, and people never would have said, yes, I'll do it. So junk fees have been challenged by the US government in multiple domains. That's one idea. Another idea is that it should be as easy to eliminate an economic relationship with someone as it is to start the economic relationship. Now, this might not have universal applicability. So it might be really easy to get married and kind of a little hard to get divorced. That might be a sensible idea. I kind of like that idea. But for, let's say, well, I'll tell you a story. There's a exercise company not far from where I live, where a friend of mine joined it thinking this would be great. And the person was there once and is paying a monthly fee and hasn't gone back, and called the company about 4 months in and said, I just am too busy. I can't get there. How do I cancel? And the company says, well, come on by and you can cancel. And the person said, did you listen to me? I don't have time to come on by. That's why I'm not exercising. The company said, well, we can't cancel you just over the phone. You got to come see us. And here we are 6 months later, and my friend is still paying approximately £70 a month to this company, which isn't doing him any good. So the legal idea adopted by the US government would ban that, at least across a certain domain. It's manipulative.
There was a news story today. David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, has been announcing proposals on the justice system in the UK, a particular reform where I wonder if you might have a perspective from Noise, where to accelerate a backlog of cases in the justice system, the proposal is to eliminate the option of trial by jury for cases that might have a conviction. I think it was originally of up to only 5 years. Sounds like a lot to me. And I think it's been modified to up to only 3. From the perspective, is there something we should learn? Actually, we'll make this one a brief one because then I want to go to Teresa while we still have time available. But my question was going to be, and let's see if Teresa asks a better question, but if there is a perspective on Noise, on anything that should be considered when considering going from the option for a defendant choosing between trial by an individual judge or trial by jury to only having the option of trial by judge. But I'll give you the choice of that and invite Teresa to put her question as well and can respond as you wish.
I was interested in, do you make a distinction or talk about propaganda in your work as opposed to manipulation? So getting back to the political field again. Because it seems like there's an awful lot of untruths being spoken at the moment, and quite a shocking. I was quite surprised that actually the US has done something about manipulation because the political sphere seemed so full of it. But actually, for the consumer, it's doing some good stuff. So it's
Right.
just, I'm interested in your thoughts between propaganda and manipulation.
Thank you. It's a great question. Propaganda is a different topic, obviously overlaps. I don't have in my own mind clarity about what propaganda is and why it's bad. So manipulation isn't deception or lying. I think it's one of 4 horse people of the apocalypse, where the other 3 are deception, lying, and coercion. Propaganda, of course, it's a super important topic, but I kind of bracket it for these purposes. For the trial by jury, if the idea is there are 2 different problems, if the idea is we can't afford to give you a trial by jury, therefore you're for offenses with fewer years in prison, you're just going to go before a judge. That's not a very Anglo-American thing to do, because the Anglo-American system prizes trial by jury. And I would very much hope that we could find a better way. If people are told you can get a faster trial if you forego a jury, that's better, but it has a little bit of an ingredient of coercion in it also. So my hope is that human imagination is such that we can solve the problem in a way that's protective of the jury right.
Oh. We talked at the start about your heuristics for productivity, that you go with the grain of your inclination. And in manipulation, one very memorable concept is your notion of the joy of missing out. So this, to summarize in very badly in front of the author, the joy of missing out is the notion that there are certain things that we buy into because they're available and other people will buy into them. So we feel we have to, but we wish they didn't exist. Maybe I go on Instagram because I'm going to miss out if I don't, but I wish that actually it didn't exist, so I didn't have to spend time on that in the first place. But thinking back to your notion of going with your inclination, could there be, we're about to have quite a transformation of work styles in the coming years, we're likely to with AI. Many people forecast that we may. Are there aspects of how we have worked in recent history where maybe that applies on a big scale? There are elements of career building that actually people maybe feel obligated to participate in because other people will, and they sort of need to keep up. And do you see any sort of positive opportunities in the coming years to experience the joy of missing out rather than the fear of missing out?
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about this. So I think I wouldn't say, and if I did say, I want to phrase it a little differently, going with my inclinations. I don't like that phrase, and it doesn't resonate with me. So if I were going with my inclinations, I'd watch Netflix more than I do. I'd eat more chocolate croissant than I do, and I'd have a worse life. So what I'd say instead is that if you really like writing and you like having written, then to find time to write is a really good thing. So there's some people I know who like having written, but they don't particularly like writing. Then that's more challenging. If you like writing, as I do, as well as like having written, then find the time to do it. Amos Tversky, and I'm going to be a little energetic about this, was a great founder of behavioral science who would be bemused at people doing things like going to extremely long meetings or going to events of various kinds. And he would say about that, for those who like that sort of thing, that's the sort of thing they like. I completely love that, because what he was saying is he does, to go to, let's say, a meeting that's a 4-hour meeting, people don't like that, but they do it. And maybe they like it, but he was saying he's not the sort of person who's going to do that. So it's not about following his inclinations, really. It's about doing things that are consistent with his conception of what makes his life best. He died young. We all might. And life best, which would have a broad range of things in it, not just, chocolate brownies and Cadbury bars. So there's that. Now, your point, and I'm very grateful for it, is my favorite chapter in the whole book, which is about what I call Barbies, which are goods that people buy but wish didn't exist. Forgive me, Barbie fans out there, but my hypothesis is that many people buy Barbies. I had a daughter who bought Barbies who really didn't like Barbies, but thought she kind of had to. And the idea is they're Barbies, which might be Instagram, it might be TikTok, it might be a party, it might be a funeral, it might be as you say, a work-related activity. This is a frontiers issue in behavioral science, and I am all excited about it, where there are goods all around that we spend time and money on, whose existence we don't like. And we have data on this. I'm working with economist co-authors. We now have a ton of data on this. The public data shows that a lot of people who use TikTok would demand significant money to stop using TikTok. They want to stay on TikTok. But if they're asked, how much would you demand to give up TikTok contingent on everyone in your community giving up TikTok? And they say, oh, I'd pay you for that. I don't want TikTok. And so that's a broad phenomenon. With work, you're clearly onto something very important. It may be that going into the office for many is a Barbie, where people are going to do it, given that people are doing it. But if no one went into the office or for some forms of work, or if there was a clear permission slip given, such that you wouldn't incur the non-user utility loss that comes from working at home. So the concept is non-user utility, which can be positive. It could be if you're the only one not using something that you think is, terrible, you get pleasure from that. But there's a lot of negative utility from being the only non-user. And that's the joy of missing out problem, the fear of missing out problem. And this would be a very good thing to get a better handle on.
Yeah, I think many of us have experienced a moment when there is a relief in letting go of something that actually we were doing more out of a sense maybe of possibly misplaced obligation. I want to turn to Neil, who always has very interesting questions.
Well, that's a setup, Paul. Thanks very much. Hi, Cass. Wonderful talk. Thank you. My question around manipulation is we live in a world where it seems impossible to turn on the TV or any form of internet, and the people on the other end of it are not trying to manipulate us in some way. I feel that was highlighted somewhat by the recent episode with President Trump and the BBC, where I think we actually realized in this country that the BBC were actually independent and we should actually fight for it. But how do we break the cycle, or how do you feel that we could break the cycle of the fact that all of our media agencies, all of the TV channels, all of the subscriptions are really manipulating us to sell subscriptions, to sell advertising, and the only purpose they really serve is to make profit for themselves?
Okay, great. Thank you. We need a definition of manipulation to warrant the empirical claim that everything we're seeing is manipulative. So I'm going to have a little experiment with your indulgence. I'm going on the New York Times right now, and I'm seeing an ad, with your indulgence, this is real time. It's Vanguard. Markets fluctuate. Vanguard principles don't. Learn more. That's not manipulative. Then the next thing I see is read former Honduras president's letter to Trump. That's not manipulative. Then if I go down, it says, got a tip? The Times offers several ways to send important information confidentially. That doesn't fall within the definition of manipulation. I'm really struggling to find any manipulation on the New York Times website. I'm not seeing any. So this may be just a good moment for the New York Times, or it might be that the New York Times is particularly manipulation free. I'm seeing a lot of stuff about passively managed index funds and how they have general principles. So that experiment came out favorably to the particular website on which I clicked. We would need a definition of manipulation, and the book tries to offer one, which is a failure to respect people's capacity for reflective and deliberative choice. It's a pretty stringent definition. Then in terms of what we will do about manipulation when it occurs, the proposal is we start with the most egregious offenses, that the word manipulation is too broad and too vague to be the foundation for criminal punishment. And then we hone in by asking what are the characteristics of an egregious case. It would involve failure to respect people's consent. So there's not adequate consent, and there's harm. So if you have an unconsented to harm that's large in magnitude, then you have a real argument for banning the practice. And that's what in Europe and the United States we're seeing incipient movements toward. Just for fun, I kind of want to try another website and see if I just got lucky with the New York Times. With your indulgence, I'll try one more. I'm hoping to see manipulation. Oh gosh, Washington Post, help doctors without borders save lives. This Giving Tuesday, give today. Yeah, that's a nudge, big time. It's not manipulative. There's nothing that fails to respect people's capacity for deliberative choice. And that's kind of all I'm seeing on the Washington Post. So we want to distinguish sharply between modes of influence and manipulation that isn't that is a particularly disrespectful form of influence. That's the idea.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose also there are nudges that are intentional and nudges that are just there in the environment. I mean, if the salient examples we can think of are no longer adhering to humanitarian principles in conflict or in other circumstances. I think there's a broader fear that the nature of today's macro environment is becoming degraded in quite important ways, and that while they not may not be nudges, there may be an impact from them which is equivalent to having a large set of quite malevolent nudges. Is that something you would recognize, or would you challenge that in the same way?
I want to talk more about it. So, if you nudge people to, get sick, or if you nudge them to get poor, what's wrong with it, as stated, is it's a nudge that compromises people's well-being, not that it's a nudge.
Yeah.
So better to nudge people to get poor than to force them to get poor, but bad to do either. If you tell people, the more alcohol you drink, especially in the morning, the less likely you are to get the flu. That's a form of influence. You could turn it into a nudge. What's bad, it's a lie, so it's deceptive. But so I think we'd want to find what are the characteristics of the thing that are concerning.
Yeah.
And if you have a reminder, that's by itself innocuous. If you have a reminder that you better take your medicine because it's due, and if you don't, something bad will happen, that's a nudge, and it's stated pretty good. If you remind people they haven't banged their head against the wall this morning yet, that's a nudge, but it's not very nice.
Yeah, wonderful. We've had so much of your time. You've been so generous with us. Is there one thing we can all do to make 2026 a less manipulative year than 2025 in celebration of your work?
Regard the world and efforts to manipulate you with bemused vigilance. So bemused vigilance is the way to go. If it's just vigilance, it's kind of tiring and a little suspicious. But if we're looking at our fellow human beings with fondness and I see what you're doing there, then days will be both better and safer.
Wonderful. Well, our choices are at the heart of democracy, and they're at the heart of capitalism. When we're able to make good choices, those things take us to very good places. And when we're not able to make good choices, they take us to bad places. So grateful to you specifically for today, but more broadly for having dedicated your career to making sure that through better ability to choose, people can live more freely, more happily. I know you're a great proponent of the John Stuart Mill notion of experiments in living and giving people the freedom to make the most of themselves. And I think that's something that we can all want to celebrate. So huge gratitude from us. And we'll look out for the app. and very curious to discover that as a highlight of 2026.
Thank you. It was a fantastic session. I really thank you.
Thank you.